I stepped out of my car, suitcase in one hand, sunglasses perched on my nose, still basking in the post-vacation glow. The trip had been perfect. Ocean waves, unlimited cocktails, no screaming neighbors, no HOA emails demanding to know why my mailbox wasn't an approved shade of beige. I was feeling relaxed, recharged, ready to step into my home and enjoy a peaceful evening of doing absolutely nothing. Then I saw it. Or rather, I didn't see it. My driveway was gone. Completely erased. Not a single trace of concrete, not a single tire mark, not even a hint that it had ever existed. In its place stood a freshly planted patch of dirt with a bright green sign that read, "Community Garden Coming Soon. Courtesy of your HOA." I blinked. Then I blinked again. I turned to my wife, who was standing beside me, mouth open in horror. My neighbor, old Mr. Jenkins, sat in his rocking chair across the street, sipping his lemonade and watching me like I was a contestant on a reality show. "You're gonna want to sit down for this one," he muttered, not even trying to hide his amusement. I dropped my suitcase and stormed toward the sign, heart pounding. My driveway. The one I had personally paid for. The one where my car had been parked just last week. The one that led directly to my house. Gone. Just gone. A few deep breaths. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe there had been a construction mix-up. Maybe. "Welcome home," a shrill voice chirped behind me. I turned to see Deborah, the HOA president, marching toward me with her signature clipboard and an expression that could only be described as aggressively smug. "What the hell happened to my driveway?" I asked, barely able to control my voice. "Oh, you must have missed the notice," she said, flipping through her clipboard like this was some minor paperwork issue and not a case of legalized robbery. "You see, after reviewing the neighborhood's original property plans, we discovered that your driveway was technically encroaching on community land." I stared at her, waiting for her to laugh, to admit this was some kind of ridiculous prank. But Deborah never joked. Not unless it was at the expense of someone else's sanity. My driveway, my personal property, was community land? She nodded enthusiastically. "That's right. And since you were out of town and didn't respond to our official letters, we had no choice but to proceed with the reclamation project. But don't worry. Once the garden is complete, you'll be able to enjoy fresh herbs and vegetables along with the rest of the community." I felt something in my brain short-circuit. Reclamation? This isn't the Louisiana Purchase, Deborah. This is my freaking driveway, Deborah tisked, shaking her head. "Actually, it was never officially yours. The HOA guidelines state, I don't care what your guidelines state. You bulldozed my property without my permission. Where's my car?" She pointed toward the end of the street. Sure enough, my car had been haphazardly parked near the neighborhood entrance, practically in a ditch. My blood pressure skyrocketed. "Oh, we had to tow it off the land before construction," she said, as if this was a completely normal sentence to say to someone whose property had just been obliterated. "It's technically parked illegally now, so I'd recommend moving it before someone reports it." I took a slow, deep breath through my nose. My wife placed a calming hand on my arm, probably sensing I was 2 seconds away from becoming the headline of the next HOA horror story. "You can't just steal someone's driveway, Deborah." She frowned. "We didn't steal it. We simply restored the land to its proper communal purpose." I turned toward my house, still trying to process the absurdity of the situation. Without a driveway, my garage was now completely useless. My front yard looked like a construction zone. And worst of all, this was all happening under some ridiculous HOA technicality that I had apparently failed to challenge in time. I turned back to her. "So, let me get this straight. You waited until I was out of town, then sent some half-baked letter knowing I wouldn't see it, and then bulldozed my property without even bothering to confirm I was okay with it." "Oh, you make it sound so sneaky," she said with a fake laugh. "But the truth is we followed proper HOA protocol. Now, if you'd like to submit an appeal, You're more than welcome to bring it up at the next meeting in 3 months. 3 months? My wife exhaled sharply. You expect us to just live like this until then? Well, Deborah mused, tapping her pen against her clipboard, you could always apply for a temporary street parking permit. But those are limited, and unfortunately, most of them have already been claimed by other residents. She flashed a saccharine smile. Tough luck. I had never felt such a burning desire to launch a clipboard into the sun. Deborah gave a satisfied nod, already turning to leave. Anyway, welcome back. Hope you had a lovely vacation. Make sure to check the HOA website for all upcoming changes. We're always working to make this community better. I watched as she marched off, completely unbothered by the fact that she had just casually upended my entire life. I turned to my neighbor, who was still rocking in his chair, watching the chaos unfold. This is insane, I muttered. Mr. Jenkins sipped his lemonade, eyes twinkling with mischief. Oh, son, you ain't seen nothing yet. And he was right. Because if the HOA thought they could pull something like this and get away with it, they were about to learn a very painful lesson. This was war. I sat on my porch, staring at the dirt patch where my driveway used to be, trying to process the sheer lunacy of the situation. The HOA had bulldozed my property, left me without parking, and then expected me to just accept it like some kind of obedient tenant in their suburban dictatorship. The rage inside me hadn't lessened since my return from vacation. If anything, it was growing stronger by the minute. Deborah and her clipboard of doom had made one crucial mistake. She underestimated just how petty I was willing to get when pushed to my limit. The first step was to figure out whether I had any legal footing at all. I spent hours sifting through old property documents, looking for anything that could prove my driveway was, in fact, mine. Nothing. It was like the HOA had preemptively scrubbed any trace of ownership, burying it under layers of bureaucratic nonsense. So, I did what any desperate homeowner would do. I called a lawyer. After an excruciatingly long hold time, I finally got through to a local real estate attorney, a man who sounded like he had seen more HOA horror stories than he cared to admit. He listened patiently as I ranted about the bulldozing, the sign, the absurdity of it all. Then he sighed, long and tired, before delivering the crushing news. Well, technically, if the HOA's property plans show that the land was originally designated as community property and no official challenge was made when they sent their notice, they might have a legal case, he explained. I gripped the phone tighter. So what you're saying is, they can just steal my driveway, and I can't do anything about it? Not exactly, he said. You can appeal it, but that process can take months. And if their bylaws allow them to reclaim land for communal use, then they'll argue that they acted within their rights. The best thing you can do is find a flaw in their argument, something they overlooked. I thanked him for his time and hung up, feeling even more infuriated than before. This wasn't just about my driveway anymore. This was about principle. About standing up against the tyranny of clipboard-wielding suburban overlords who thought they could bulldoze their way into people's lives unchecked. If the HOA wanted to play games, I was more than happy to join in. The first step was making their lives as difficult as they had made mine. I started small, petty. The kind of revenge that wouldn't get me fined but would drive them just a little bit crazy. First, I borrowed a megaphone from a friend and spent the morning reading aloud from the HOA handbook outside Deborah's house. I made sure to emphasize the rules she herself had broken over the years. Her fence, for example, which was precisely 2 inches too tall. Her trash cans, which she left out longer than the HOA allowed. Every violation I could find, I recited in the most obnoxious, overly enthusiastic tone possible. The next move involved decorations. Since the HOA had taken my driveway in the name of community beautification, I decided to contribute to the neighborhood's aesthetic in my own unique way. I purchased a set of life-sized, neon pink flamingo statues and arranged them right in the middle of the dirt patch where my driveway once stood. Then, to add a touch of elegance, I installed a large, flashing LED sign that read, future site of the HOA's driveway demolition memorial. By the end of the first week, Deborah was seething. I could see it in the way she avoided eye contact whenever she walked past my house, in the huffy emails she sent reminding all residents to maintain the visual integrity of their properties. But she couldn't find me. Not yet, anyway, because technically I wasn't violating any written rule. But I wasn't just playing around. I was still digging, still searching for a way to overturn their ridiculous decision. And then, like a miracle, I found it. Late one night, while scrolling through old community records online, I stumbled upon something interesting. A property map. Not just any map, but one from before the HOA had formed, back when the neighborhood was still being developed. And according to that map, my driveway wasn't built on community land at all. It was, in fact, part of my lot. I stared at the document for a long moment, my heart racing. If this was accurate, then the HOA had made a massive mistake. They hadn't just bulldozed my property under some legally sound technicality. They had stolen land they had no right to claim in the first place. But proving it wouldn't be easy. The HOA had already covered their tracks with the new updated property plans they had used to justify the demolition. I needed something stronger, something that would force them into a corner. The answer came from the least expected place. Mr. Jenkins. The old man had been sitting on his porch, watching my flamingo display with an amused smirk when I decided to approach him. If anyone had dirt on this neighborhood, it was him. "You ever hear anything about property lines being changed around here?" I asked casually, hoping he'd take the bait. He sipped his lemonade, eyes twinkling. "Oh, you mean how the HOA tried to adjust the maps back when they first took over? Yeah, I remember that mess. Bunch of folks fought it at the time, but the HOA buried it under enough paperwork to make most people give up." I leaned in. "Do you have anything on it? Documents, proof, anything?" Jenkins chuckled, standing up with a stretch. "Son, I don't throw away a damn thing. Come inside." 15 minutes later, I was holding a stack of old HOA meeting minutes, property complaints, and a particularly damning letter from a former board member detailing how the HOA had knowingly altered property lines to claim more land for community projects. I had them. Now, all I needed was the right moment to strike. The next HOA meeting was in 2 weeks, and for once, I couldn't wait. Because when I walked into that room, I wasn't just coming with complaints. I was coming with evidence. And if Deborah and her little band of suburban tyrants thought they could bulldoze my life without consequence, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The HOA meeting was held in the neighborhood clubhouse, a sterile, overly beige room with uncomfortable folding chairs and a coffee station that smelled like burnt rubber. Usually, these meetings were dull, filled with pointless debates about lawn heights and mailbox colors. But tonight, the room was packed. Word had spread that I was coming in with something big, and I could see the curiosity on my neighbors' faces as I walked in, a folder of documents tucked under my arm. Deborah sat at the head of the room, her clipboard resting on the table in front of her like a weapon. She didn't look nervous, but there was an unmistakable tightness in her smile when she glanced at me. The rest of the board members sat beside her, each of them exuding the same overconfident smugness that made my blood boil. The meeting began with the usual droning agenda items: approving last month's minutes, discussing the annual block party, and reminding residents to keep their trash bins hidden from street view. I sat through it, waiting, biding my time. Then, finally, Deborah's voice rang out, as sharp and grating as ever. "Now, before we move on, I believe one of our residents has requested to address the board." She turned her gaze to me, feigning politeness. "You have 5 minutes." I stood, clearing my throat. Every eye in the room was on me. I took a breath, letting the anticipation build. As most of you know, 2 weeks ago, my driveway was bulldozed by the HOA under the claim that it was built on community land. I was given no real warning, no chance to dispute it before the destruction took place. However, after conducting my own research, I've found that the HOA's claim was not only misleading but completely false. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Deborah's lips pressed together into a thin line. I continued, pulling a stack of papers from my folder. These are original property maps from before the HOA even existed. According to these records, my driveway was built on land that has always been part of my private property. The only reason the HOA was able to claim it as community land is because, years ago, the board, under the leadership of Deborah's predecessor, falsified an updated map to make certain properties appear smaller than they actually were. The murmurs turned into outright whispers. People exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from shock to anger. I let that sink in before I flipped to another document. And this, I said, holding it up for emphasis, is a letter from a former HOA board member, written years ago, confirming that this change was made without legal justification. It was an attempt to give the HOA control over more land for future projects. Deborah sat up straighter. "That is a very serious accusation," she said, her voice clipped. "Oh, I know," I shot back. "That's why I had a lawyer look over everything before I came here. And guess what? The HOA had no legal right to take my driveway. Which means, Deborah, you and the board are responsible for property destruction and illegal land seizure." Silence. For the first time, I saw real fear flicker in Deborah's eyes. The neighbors were no longer whispering, they were outright talking now. Some were nodding in agreement, others looking at the board members with suspicion. I had them. A man in the crowd stood up. "Wait, if they changed the maps back then, how do we know this didn't happen to other houses?" That was the moment everything shifted. Because suddenly, it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every homeowner in that room wondering if their property had been tampered with, if their land had been quietly shrunk down over the years to give the HOA more control. Another neighbor spoke up. "Yeah, my fence was torn down last year because they said it was on community land." "Was that a lie too?" A woman near the back called out. "They fined me for expanding my porch, said I was encroaching on HOA property." "Was that legal?" Deborah looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. She fumbled with her clipboard, trying to regain control. "Now, let's not jump to conclusions." "No," I cut in. In fact, let's have an independent survey done on all the properties here. Let's compare them to the original maps and see just how much land the HOA has wrongfully claimed over the years." The room erupted. People were furious, demanding answers, demanding their property lines be reviewed. I watched as Deborah shrank in her seat, realizing she had lost control of the narrative. Then, the final nail in the coffin. I pulled out the last document, a section from the HOA's own bylaws. "And here's the best part," I said, my voice carrying over the noise. "According to HOA regulations, if the board is found to have misused funds or acted outside their legal authority, the entire board can be removed by a community vote." That did it. Someone shouted, "I vote to remove them." Another voice echoed, "Me too." Deborah slammed her clipboard down. "That is not how this works." But she was wrong. Because once the motion was raised, people jumped on it. The bylaws were clear. With enough signatures, the board could be forced out immediately. And judging by the outrage in that room, they had more than enough. The vote passed before Deborah even had a chance to protest. Just like that, she and her board were out. By the end of the night, the HOA had collapsed into chaos. People were demanding access to records, threatening lawsuits, and questioning every fine they had ever been charged. I stood back and watched as Deborah stormed out of the clubhouse, her reign of terror finally over. The following week, the new, hastily elected HOA board approved my request to have my driveway rebuilt at the HOA's expense. But I had one final touch to add. On the day of the driveway reopening, I threw a neighborhood party right on the newly poured concrete. Barbecue, music, lawn chairs. It was a full celebration of HOA liberation. And at the center of it all, right at the edge of my driveway, I installed one last decoration. A gold-plated sign that read, "This driveway was stolen by the HOA and rightfully returned. Never forget." The neighborhood cheered. Revenge wasn't just sweet. It was paved in fresh concrete.